Good evening, everyone. In the Seder service in Passover, in the family that I grew up in, because we did have Passover service in our family, we would say, why is this night different than any other nights? So this is why this night is different than any other nights, because we have the rare enjoyment of having my friend Keshava here with the harmonium, which was an ordinary thing for a brief period of time, but now it's a very special occasion. So after we pray, we're going to have a nice, relaxed session of chanting before I start talking about the Bhagavad Gita. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dear friend Swami Kriyananda, we offer our lives in openness, receptivity, and devotion. Guide us and bless us, that we may live in this world in attunement with thy will, that everything we do brings us closer to thy light. Om. Peace. Amen.
Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Devalam Jnanamurtim Dandvatidam Gagana Sadrisham Tattvamasya Dilakshayam Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvade Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Triguna-rahitam Sadgurum Dham Namami. Full of bliss, giving joy transcendent of higher knowledge, the abode, dull no more, clear as the heavens, known to all as thou art that. He is pure, permanent, unmoving, the everlasting seer of all, far, far beyond qualities and thought. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. My Lord, I bow to thee. This next chant is a dialogue between the devotee and God, and I like to think of it at times of the dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna. And let's take it in that way in preparation for our discussion on the sacred text of the Bhagavad Gita. giving me lots of trouble. Oh, my Lord is giving me lots of trouble. Oh, my Lord. Oh, that enemy I will deceive, remaining in the castle of peace, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. What will be my fate? Oh Lord, tell me. Pranayam be thy religion. Pranayam will give thee salvation. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is beloved God. Pranayam is Creator Lord. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Control the little pranayam, become all-pervading pranayam. You won't have to fear anything anymore. 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 Desire, my great enemy, with his soldiers surrounded me, is giving me lots of trouble. Oh, my Lord is giving me lots of trouble. Oh, my Lord. That enemy I will deceive, remaining in the castle of peace, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. What will be my fate? Oh Lord, tell me. Pranayam be thy religion. Pranayam will give thee salvation. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is beloved God. Pranayam is Creator Lord. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Control the little pranayam, become all-pervading pranayam. his soldiers surrounded me, is giving me lots of trouble. Oh, my Lord is giving me lots of trouble. Oh, my Lord, that enemy I will deceive, remaining in the castle of peace, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. What will be my fate? Oh Lord, tell me. Pranayam be thy religion. Pranayam will give thee salvation. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is beloved God. Pranayam is Creator Lord. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Pranayam is the cosmic world. Control the little pranayam, become more pervading pranayam. You won't have to fear anything anymore. 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 Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. Night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. tamal tree is blue, my Krishna is blue. The tamal tree is blue, so I do love thee, tamal tree. So I do love thee, my tamal tree. And when I die, oh mother, do put me high on a branch of the tamal tree, on a branch of the tamal tree, where Krishna sat, there I would die. Where Krishna sat, there I would die, on a branch of the tamal tree, on a branch of the tamal tree. My Krishna is blue, the tamal tree is blue. My Krishna is blue, the tamal tree is blue. So I do love thee, tamal tree. So I do love thee, my tamal tree. And when I die, oh mother, do put me high on a branch of the tamal tree, on a branch of the tamal tree, where Krishna sat, there I would die. Where Krishna sat, there I would die, on a branch of the tamal tree, on a branch of the tamal tree. My Krishna is blue, the tamal tree is blue. My Krishna is blue, the tamal tree is blue. So I do love thee, tamal tree. So I do love thee, my tamal tree. And when I die, oh mother, do put me high follies life's way, keep floating on O's way. Wipe the dust of each one's feet, serving Mother where she sleeps. Wipe the dust of each one's feet, serving Mother where she sleeps. From whence do they come here? Whither do they flit away? From whence do they come here? Whither do they flit away? In all follies life's way, keep floating on hope's way. When my dreams dream is done, she will lift me on her lap.
Peace. Well, that's the way to start a class. Puts me at a great disadvantage, though. So we are making our way. We are a little more than halfway through, I think, now. This big book. Yeah. Yeah, we're just a little more than halfway through. We're up to chapter 7 of the Gita. And I'm at a great disadvantage in this section of the Gita, so I'm going to play it a little differently, because these are very esoteric sections, and I'm better at how spirituality relates to everyday life than I am at these really more subtle ones. So because the book is available and I don't have secret access to anything, if I skip over some of these verses a little bit, I can always send you into the book to read them. The fact that Swami could write with so much authority about so many subtle subjects is really extraordinary. I want to remind you often that Swamiji sat with Master when he dictated his commentary on the Gita, which was one of the major assignments that was given to him by his guru, the scripture which has lasted for millennia. And Swamiji, decades later, let's see, from 1960, 1952 to 2006, so that's 50 years, really. 50 years later, the experience of hearing Master dictate and then reading the manuscript that he had dictated is so powerful in Swamiji's mind that he could just write down what he knew Master had said. And also, I think another aspect of it, which Swami didn't emphasize, is that he himself could, his own consciousness had developed to the point where he really understood what Master had said. So he could remember it because he knew it. I mean, I say that because I have a very good memory for things Swamiji said, but it's not that I've memorized them, it's that I've grown to understand them. And so as a consequence, when a question or subject comes up, I remember what he said because I understand the issue. And then I have Swami's voice in my mind to give confirmation to what I know. So here we are, chapter 7 of the Gita, verse 4. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, the perceiving mind, manas, discernment, buddhi, and causative self-awareness, ahankara. Such are the eightfold divisions of my manifested nature, prakriti. In the earlier ones we were learning about prakriti and para prakriti and apara prakriti. These are all Sanskrit words with very exact meanings. He says right here, and I appreciate this, Krishna is speaking here in cosmic, not in limited individual terms. In so doing, he pushes outward the very edges of what mankind in this age is capable of understanding. So I really appreciated that Swami let us off the hook here. So what he's talking about when he says earth, water, fire, air, ether, he's not referencing the chakras, but the way Swamiji from Master learned about the chakras, starting at the first chakra, and to my mind, it's the most useful way of understanding the chakras, is the chakras are 5 elements. And elements are not used in this word, in this context, the way we speak of elements in chemistry, which has a very specific meaning. But they are literally elemental stages of the manifestation of the material world. So the first chakra is the earth chakra, second chakra is the water chakra, the third chakra is the fire chakra, the fourth is the air chakra, the fifth chakra is ether. Ether is also one of those words whose meaning has changed. Ether has become a particular chemical element. But Master describes ether as a distinct physical reality that, as he puts it, let's see, how does he say it, is space. And space is not nothing. Space is a thing, which he said, a distinct vibration separating the astral from the physical universe. So I'm just going to repeat that because there's not much more I can say about it. So when this chapter goes earth, water, fire, air, ether, it's already talking about we're moving up the chakras. And then Swami takes this the other way around, that this is how creation is manifest. It starts beyond creation. It comes into the level of ether, which is the cosmic gases, is how he always refers to it, which is a subtle form. And then it takes a more definite form of air, because air is measurable in the material world, even though it's still imperceptible to the senses. We know it's there. We experience it because, think about wind, think about hurricane, think about the force of it. The air itself is a powerful force that we know about. It's more subtle than ether, but then the air, which is the element of the gases again, it comes down into fire. Fire begins to cool and it becomes molten, and then when it that's the watery element, and then it solidifies as the earth element. So this is like how that which is unmanifested becomes manifested. It's also telling us, going the other way, once we are fully manifested in the earth element, how do we move to in the more subtle ways? So earth becomes molten, it becomes liquid. That liquid heats up with the application of energy, it becomes fire. Fire, when the material world is consumed, it's released into the air. And then when the air itself dissipates into the more subtle, it becomes pure space. So just in those 5 words, Krishna was giving us this whole picture of how we come to be manifested, how the material plane comes to be manifested, and then how we reverse that process and exit. This is a factor of when the physical body dies. Well, going the other way, and I've mentioned this many times already because it's such a fascinating fact. Master said the sperm and the ovum unite, and then the first element, and this is like medical science, the first thing that happens is from the medulla, where the sperm and ovum unite, a straight line is made. In the very earliest pictures of the developing physical body in the womb, it looks like a matchstick, because that's the spine. It starts, just above the ether element. It comes through the energy of the medulla, which is where the ego entraps the cosmic self, and then it comes all the way down the spine. And when someone dies, if I've seen this on several occasions, if depending on how they die, meaning on what takes their body and various other things, but on several occasions I've literally seen this happen. Just as the energy stretches out into the spine, and then the spine sends the energy out and makes the body, because corresponding to the chakras are these concentration of physical nerve centers. So once that element is in place, then those nerves begin to manifest the human body. And just as it manifests down that way, when the soul is withdrawing, it goes first from the extremities into the spine, and then from the spine it walks right up and will either exit through the medulla or through the spiritual eye, depending on what the consciousness is. Most people sink backwards into unconsciousness, literally, and fall back into the medulla, which is to say, the ego identity of ourselves as a separate entity transfers to the astral world and transfers to the next incarnation. The effort of the yogi is to keep the attention at the spiritual eye. So as the consciousness withdraws, instead of sinking backward into habitual ego consciousness, we rise upward into divine consciousness. This is why they say it's often very helpful when someone is dying to actually touch them at this point, to draw their attention to the spiritual eye. And people that I've seen who die very consciously, you'll see them dying looking up like that. A man, one of the first people to die at Ananda village many years ago was Hanel Cassidy. He was a bit older than all of us. I think he was elder even to Swamiji. And he died in his 70s, late 70s. He was a hardworking man in our garden. He taught all of our people to garden. He was a world expert in organic gardening. He worked up until a certain day when he was too ill to work. He had cancer, but he hadn't told anyone. And he lay down on his bed, and 6 weeks later he died. And when he died, he'd been mostly unconscious for several days. But he was a very serious yogi. And then just before he died, he sat up, and there was a picture of Master, and his eyes raised, and he looked at the picture of Master. And then he died. I mean, that's really pretty glorious. You know, all of us, in this society, it's considered impolite to be talking and thinking about death, but that's completely foolish. We should be thinking about it all the time. So this here, and then the other case I was going to say was a woman friend of mine, and she was a very devoted soul. She wasn't a yogi on the level of Hanel, but she was a very devoted person with a lot of love for God. And I just watched her. She was just lying on her back. She too died of cancer. She was lying on her back, and you could see she gradually lost control of her legs and her feet. She wasn't conscious, but everything became very, very still. And you could literally, I don't know how exactly now that I think about it, but we watched the energy just move up like this. Watch the breath just sort of withdraw like this, and just watched it. It took a relatively short period of time. We just watched it just like that. You could feel it and you could see it. And I don't think she went fully into the spiritual eye, but she undoubtedly went to a very high place. But it was extraordinary. You know, earth, water, fire, air, ether, and Master called this super ether. So, you know, how would you know when those words are just listed there in the Gita? But that is exactly what it's about. Then he says, you know, the three elements of the mind: manas, buddhi, and ahankara. Manas, this is how Master would say it. This analogy is given elsewhere in this book, but manas simply perceives. It just perceives. Buddhi, the intellect, describes what it sees. It says, like the way it's put is, the manas could simply just see a horse, but it wouldn't call it anything. It would be a movement of energy. It wouldn't know what to call it. The discriminating mind, buddhi, comes in and says, oh, that's a horse. And then ahankara is the awareness of self. So then someone would say, well, that's my horse. But those can all just be impersonal facts. Now, what Swami points out here is that, oddly enough, they don't mention chitta. Usually there's the fourth element, which is chitta. And in that manas, buddhi, ahankara, chitta, it can be, oh, that's a horse, that's my horse, but you're still not egoically bound to it. It's still just a fact. It might be the horse that you're responsible for. It's an impersonal fact. Chitta is feeling. And then chitta will say, oh, I'm so happy because I see my horse. And that's the point at which limitation sets in. But Swami also talks about it. He just talks about chitta in a different way. And there's one point that he made that is so important here. This is what I find whenever I'm lost in some vastly esoteric part of Swami's writing, which I get caught in the Bhagavad Gita, and I got super caught in when I was doing the Patanjali, commentaries on Patanjali, because I'm not sure how I knew this, didn't know this before I started, but I didn't know it. At a certain point in the Patanjali Sutras, we entered Samadhi, and then there were still lots of pages left in the book. And I thought maybe I could sneak us up to the door, and then I had to go on and on after that. But the remarkable thing about Swamiji's writing, and really about spiritual truth, is, and I mean this truly, it applies on all levels. And Swamiji also had this wonderful way of making the extremely esoteric comprehensible, insofar as it can be comprehended, because he'll make analogies that relate to something we do know. So here's an interesting point. The definition of yoga, yoga meaning union, not yoga postures, of course, but yoga meaning union with, and it means the union of the small self with the infinite self, the integration of everything back into oneness. Yoga is the neutralization of the vortices, the vrittis of chitta, of feeling. Yoga is the neutralization of the vortices of feeling. Now, Swami says, what he says here, he just brings up this point. Yoga is not the cancellation, that's the word he uses, of your feelings. Now, there's a very, very, very common misunderstanding that goes on in yoga practice. And it's a very serious misunderstanding. Recently, someone described the atmosphere of Ananda as emphasizing the positive. That it's a culture that in which we are trained to focus on the positive. Now, that sounds in itself, sure, that's a good idea, the power of positive thinking. But there was a further implication in the statement. It was very sincerely meant, but it really struck me, and I really had to think about it a long time, because that has often been presented as the limitation of Ananda, that we emphasize the positive, and therefore there's all these other things drawn to it. We're afraid of the shadow. We refuse to deal with what's really there. But that's not true. We emphasize the positive from the point of view that this world is always dual. So are we going to emphasize on the fact that this terrific challenge that I'm being offered is giving me the opportunity to grow? Or am I going to just think about the fact that, oh, life is so unfair because I have to face this terrific challenge? And so, but the challenge is still there. And the effort is not to minimize. The effort is to be, well, the effort is for truth. It's not really for positive or negative or anything like that. The spiritual path is about truth. It's just about what is. And Swamiji often points out that reality always wins. So it just doesn't do us any good to emphasize something that is not related to what is. So we have to understand, before we can know what to do about something, we have to know first what it is. But the positive emphasis is based on a very simple fact, which is that everything in creation is moving toward bliss. And we are forever guided by a divine guru. And that divine guru is taking us where we need to go. I mean, what better news could we have than that? I recently was reminded of, it's not an esoteric phrase of Master, I mean, it's well known, it's around often, but I'd lost track of it. Unknown, as he says this in one of his poems, unknown, I will walk by your side and guard you with invisible arms. I put it up on my wall so that I can look at it every morning when I wake up. Unknown, I will walk by your side. There's just so much that's going on in this world that's unknown to us. Unknown, the Master says, I will walk by your side and guard you with invisible arms. The human mind doesn't quite know what to do with that. Does that mean everyone? Master said to Swamiji, when Swami was there with him as a disciple, he said, Master was talking to Swamiji. Master corrected Swamiji on something that Swami said, when he was in a setting many miles away from Master, where Master was nowhere near, could not possibly have overheard, and there was no one else who could have reported it to him. And then Master said to Swamiji, you know, in that situation, that wasn't the best thing to say. You could have said this. And Swami said, you knew. And Master just looked at Swami and said, well, I know every thought you think. It's just like, why would you be surprised? So Swamiji has told that story many times. It's a beautiful story. I said, sir, is that still true? Meaning, Master's out of the body. Swami looked at me like, you know, how could you even be asking the question? And Swami just said, of course. Like, this is exactly what Swami says here. It's pushing to the edges of what the human mind can actually comprehend. So we have this natural thought that Master walks next to the great saints, and perhaps he guards the great saints. But why would he guard me? Why would he not guard me? We just have this idea that they're finite, that he has a finite amount of time or a finite interest. And so naturally you have to get in line, and only those who qualify. But that's 100% opposite of what the actual facts are, that it's, well, as Swami put it once, omnipresence, to be infinite also means to be infinitesimal, is how he put it. It's just, again, the human mind can't go there. And so read these chapters and try to understand a little bit. But here, now this is what I want to say. Chitta is our fundamental quality. Consciousness itself, Swami said, is a feeling. It's not an abstract idea. It's like, and the knowing of God's presence, it's a feeling. I can intellectualize it a great deal, but intellectualizing it and being able to philosophically explain it is quite different than knowing it in my heart that it's true. And in fact, the intellect confuses me, because the intellect says, how could Master be walking unknown next to me? He must be too busy. And then we get thoughts in our minds like, I don't want to bother him. This was very, very early in my spiritual life, I think my first year, 1971, when I was living at Ananda village. I saw Swamiji often during that time, but he went into seclusion. And during the time he was in seclusion, I was naughty. And I got myself into a certain amount of trouble, just as I was inclined to do. And I just created kind of a little mess for myself. And I was embarrassed, and I also was disinclined to interrupt Swami's seclusion. But my friend, fortunately, knew that I needed help, and she knew Swamiji better than I did. So she wrote to Swamiji and basically said, Asha's in trouble and she needs a little help. So he invited me to come over, and he didn't break his silence. So we had a conversation where he sat at the typewriter and he wrote answers, and I would read them, and then I would respond verbally, and then he would write. So we kind of went through my little kerfuffle and what I had done and what I had said and the mess that it had caused and how we were going to solve it. In the great scheme of things, it was a minor kerfuffle. In my own career, it was a minor kerfuffle, but it was an early kerfuffle, so it loomed larger. So in that whole context, there we were. And Swami then was walking me to the door, also in silence, and I said something like, I'm so sorry that I had to bother you with this. And all of a sudden, he got a very stern look on his face, and he motioned me back. And the way his house was set up, it was just the dome, but his typewriter and office was in one corner, and the door was on the other side. So we had to march back down a couple of stairs and go to the office, and he sat down at his typewriter. He said, "You insult my friendship." That's what he wrote. And I was like, good heavens, now I'm starting a second kerfuffle. You insult my friendship. And I just said, what? And he said, if you imagine that my convenience is more important than your welfare,
Who loves you like that? I mean, the reason we can't imagine it is who, it's not that people don't want to love us like that, but who has that degree of selflessness? You know, that deep generosity of heart. People try, and God knows I have angels for friends, so I think I can count more than most. But even still, ask myself, you know, that my convenience means nothing compared to your welfare. That's what Swami was saying to me. Of course, I never forgot it. But you see, there's also something much more subtle. This is what I mean about bringing it down to something we can experience so we can take the principle and apply it to what we can't. Why would Master not walk by my side? Why would I think that he wouldn't? Well, these are very deep questions. At Spiritual Renewal Week this year, this is being recorded in July of 2022. Spiritual Renewal Week this year, my whole little contribution, my little half-hour part, was about receiving. Just about why don't we just accept that we are perfectly loved by God? That's what Jean Vianney, a French saint, said. If you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy. But we don't. But why not? Because we have all these conflicting cross currents of egoic misunderstanding. This is where Sister Gyanamata had this wonderful, one of her letters to Master, and I'm paraphrasing it. But the language, the meaning was, I know, Master, that you were sent by Babaji to do this world-changing work that's going to bring the whole planet into Dwapara Yuga. And, you know, she just wrote, but she wrote very succinctly, I know how great your mission is. But then she said, I like to think, though, I like to think, I prefer to think, is what she was saying. I know all that's true, but I like to think you came just for me. And that wasn't inappropriate. You know, that was the words of someone who knew how much God loves her. That's what God wants us to understand, is how much we are loved. I like to think you came just for me. Master said, I will return again and again, 1 trillion times if necessary, crossing crags of suffering with bleeding feet, as long as one stray brother is left behind. He didn't write that. That's not hyperbole. That's, you insult my friendship if you think that my comfort is more important than your welfare. And then the Festival of Light says, greater can no love be than this, from a life of infinite joy and freedom in God, willingly to embrace limitation, pain, and death for the salvation of mankind. Such ever has been the sacrifice of the great masters for the world. Then it goes on. Here then is the fourth and last stage of the soul's long journey. I mean, all of us have to go there. Which is why we have to start practicing. We have to start practicing making the welfare of others less important than our own convenience. Then you hear magnificent stories. I wish I could remember the saint, but I can't. Of, you know, there's stories in the concentration camps where someone is condemned to be locked in a room and to starve to death, and someone else says, no, I'll take his place. And the guards don't care, so he just says, no, he has a family, he has reasons to survive. I don't. You know, greater can no love be than this. And this is, unfortunately, I say it unfortunately, because this is really where we're all going. In that part of the Festival of Light, we quote those wonderful lines, this is a sacrifice of the great master, but what comes right after it is, this is the fourth and last stage of the soul's long journey. So that's where everyone has to go, to that level of realization where, and Swami writes about this in here, and I'm actually just, even as I'm saying this, where the ego principle still exists in the sense that there is an awareness of individuality, but it's impersonal. The fact that my individuality exists is just like saying that's a horse, that's my horse. It's just like I perceive it. I recognize that that's the case, but there's no chitta, there's no happiness dependent on what happens to that individuality. It's just an impersonal fact. And the feeling level, and this is what where I was coming to, because this was the important point. We think, people accidentally think, that what that means to neutralize the vortices of chitta, of feeling, is that I cancel out my feelings, I don't have them. And that's where there's misunderstanding. I'm supposed to emphasize the positive. No, you're supposed to be authentically yourself. You're supposed to self-introspect with absolute honesty and fearlessness. And humility. Humility is very difficult because if we introspect with absolute honesty and fearlessness, sometimes it's not a pretty picture. And sometimes the aspiration I hold for myself, the self-image that I've grown to rely upon, the self-worth that is dependent on, is revealed to not be true. I mean, children are marvelous at showing us this, but honest adults are good. Shivani was caught up in a complicated situation with someone she didn't get along with very well. She wrote to Swamiji about it. He said, oh, that person just wants to be your friend. And Shivani, God bless her, is so honest. Friend, she said, I don't even want to be in the same room with him. You know? It was just like, I'm not going to pretend here. Another friend in a similar exchange, Swami just said, oh, you know, again, he just wants to be your friend. I think it was almost the same thing. And she just wrote back, I'm just not that good, sir. He may want to be my friend, but I don't want to be his. I'm not that good. It's what a little Jyotish's son said to him when he was about 6, when Jyotish suggested that his son expand his heart. His son said, I don't want to be that good. You know, that's just it. I don't want to be. So we have to have that kind of honesty, because reality will win. Okay. I remember saying to Swami once when he'd given me some instructions that were very hard to follow, and I tried for a while and I just wasn't doing what he said. And by that point in my life I realized I needed to be honest with Swami. The earlier in my life I tried to look good. And believe me, that was a waste of energy. You know, we always know when people are shining us on. You don't have to be Kriyananda to be able to tell somebody's just playing with you, but it took Swami to tell me, you never fooled me. Well, that was a colossal waste of time. So I tried not to do that. I tried to have the courage not to do that. I said to Swamiji, you know, you told me to do this. I recognize the wisdom of it. Not a chance. He said, okay, so much for theory. Let's deal with reality. I mean, he didn't take an extra breath. It wasn't like he wanted me to emphasize something that wasn't true. He wanted to be authentically myself. But the positive is, there's always a solution. That's what the positive is. The positive is not that, oh, I feel great about everything. I have neutralized the vortices of feeling within me. I'm not angry, I'm not sad, I'm not upset. You know, who are you fooling? Certainly not God, and not yourself either. Because when you just try to cancel out what you feel, it goes underground and then makes weird experiences later, like super weird. They just, like, things start happening, you don't know where they're coming from. That's why even the Gita says it's of no avail to suppress. So we have to really understand that. What we have to do is we have to come to calmness about it. This is what Swami says. It's by pacification, is how Swami puts it. But I would just call it, you have to become calm about it. This is who I am. This is the reality of it. But the neutralization of it is that this is just what is. This is just reality. And much more profound than that. And the divine is behind it all. This is just a wave on the ocean. We neutralize it because we just see it's a wave on the ocean. And there's no need to ride it up or ride it down or push it aside or want it to be something else. It just is what it is, and this is what I'm dealing with. We just can't make a success of it with other people's karma. It's the most I learned the phrase recently, which is that people look for what was the phrase I learned? A spiritual workaround. That's what it was. And I knew just what it meant. I'd never heard the phrase before. Meaning, because I've seen it and I've watched it. And the wonderful thing about Ananda, about Master and Swamiji, is you can postpone the day of reckoning, but you can't escape it. Not if you're sincere. And sometimes you can postpone it for 25 years, but if there's an aberration in the, it's just like when something is spinning, if it's moving slow enough, it can be on a wobble, but that won't matter. But as you work and as you get more and more sincere, and the way Swamiji trains us, which is extremely valid, and this is the emphasize the positive, but the right meaning of it. Swami always go with your strengths. Just go with your strengths. There's so much false teaching that says confront your weaknesses, but that's not really how actual transformation takes place. It's just too depressing. Master even said it in a wonderful way. Very, very, very rarely do we get the Guru's blessing on our own preferences, but this one is terrific. He says, if there's a karmic challenge in front of you that you know is bigger than you can pass, run away. Don't you love that? Run away. And I've followed that advice. If I just know that if I really try to talk to that person or go into that situation, I'm not going to do anything I'm going to be proud of later. I just don't go. Just don't do it. Run away. Now, of course, sometimes you can't. But lots of times you can. You don't have to go looking for trouble. Trouble will find you. But emphasize your strengths. That's what Swami would do. My first years at Ananda, he gave me so many different jobs. In retrospect, trying desperately to find something I could actually do. So I'd be a few months here and a few months there, and then he'd switch me off to this. And, as I woke up, as the years went by, I realized I just was too confused and chaotic in myself. Kerfuffles. I just couldn't make things happen, but he just kept moving me and, giving me something that was more and more suited to who I am, until finally we began to find some things that would flow. If he just put me flat up against the things that I couldn't do, it sounds good. Oh, well, if you're a real devotee, you'll just do it, And some people can learn that way. I have friends who have been placed somewhere and forced to face into it and made magnificent breakthroughs through doing it, but that never worked for me. I just didn't have that kind of endurance. And Swami knew that, so he would just move me until finally we found the things that I could do, and success builds on success. And gradually there's a flow of energy. We don't cancel things out, but we just keep moving with the energy until we find a way to live. It's a long process. But that's also an emphasis on the positive. Don't just wallow and suffer and die in your faults. Just say, yes, I have some faults. So the most magnificent story of that is one Swami tells of a devotee of Master's who took Kriya Yoga but was also an alcoholic. And he just was unable to stop drinking. And for a time, and it doesn't say how long, was it months? Was it years? Was it decades? For a time, he would have Kriya beads in one hand, and he would actually have whiskey in the other hand. And he would meditate, he would do a few Kriyas, he would drink a little whiskey, he'd do a few more Kriyas. They are polar opposites of each other. The Kriya raises your energy up towards superconsciousness. The liquor pulls your consciousness down to subconscious. So he was just, neutralizing his own efforts. But one day, finally, he just looked at the Kriya and he looked at the whiskey. This is a true story Swami tells. And he just took the whiskey and he set it aside and he never wanted to pick it up again. Should he have just sat there drinking, thinking, I can't do Kriya because I'm drinking? He said, well, I can't do anything about my drinking, but I can do something about my Kriya. So this is how we gradually bring things to, we pacify it, we neutralize the ups and downs of it. I'm not just sunk into drinking, like this. I'm working with this, and gradually it comes to balance, and we are able to move forward. If we say, I'm not an alcoholic, I don't drink, or I'm an evil person and I can't do Kriya, no, you just take what you can, you keep adding it to it, and just you just see everything all at the same time. We are such a mixed bag. Swamiji commented once about the way he put it, because there was a period of time when we were being persecuted by fellow devotees in another spiritual organization, and very, very high souls were doing things that we found very hard to justify. And Swamiji put it like this. He said, the way we develop, he said, we have a lot of compartments in our subconsciousness. And he said, and a lot of them are like, like closed-in cells. If you were looking at it from the top, they're just little enclosed cells. And he said, thinking in terms, and he was talking about these great devotees, he said, all the compartments of their subconscious may be completely clear, but there's just a little something left over here. And the fact that this particular compartment still has chaos, a little chaos in it, doesn't in any way negate the fact that all of these areas of their consciousness are sparkling clean. It just doesn't work out in these neat, linear, now I have it figured out ways. It's much more nuanced. I mean, these are the ways in which we just gradually we relax about ourselves. We realize that the path to realization is just very different. That's what I learned from Swamiji so much. I was talking to someone about this today. It's like all these levels of reality exist at the same time. If you have a copy of Conversations with Yogananda, look at number 99. It's amazing. It's about Master being omniscient, but not quite. And he says something like, it's kind of confusing, being omniscient. I mean, again, I'm paraphrasing, but that's just about what he said. Because I sort of know things, I know things, but then I also need people to tell me. The whole conversation was about, like, Swamiji was in charge of the monks. Does he have to tell Master what's going on, or does Master already know? And so Master sort of says, well, this, it's just, it's complicated being me. Just you think like, what? Because we have these cardboard images. But because I knew Swamiji's for so long in so many circumstances, and the magnitude of his consciousness and the power of his consciousness and of his self-control and of his ability to live in this world, he horrified us by constantly talking about he would go to the dentist without taking Novocaine. And I just hated it when I started talking about it. I mean, the mere thought of it, I tried it once, for a very minor operation, and it was almost unbearable, and I never ever considered it again. Swami had root canals and extractions, and he would love to tell us. I finally thought about it, and I realized everyone fears physical pain. And in the life that we live in the modern world, as a fortunate thing, we're just not confronted with it that often. But to challenge yourself in these ways, as I said, I tried it tiny once, and I just decided this is not my sadhana. I'm not going to do this. But Swami did this regularly. And the most amazing was he had a hip replacement or a repair on the prosthesis. I think is what it was. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, they operated on his hip. And he refused to go under, to be put unconscious. They did it with a spinal because he wasn't squeamish, so they could do all that, and they deadened his body, so he couldn't feel it, but he was still conscious. But when they were working on the hip, the anesthesia wore off, and they were still sewing up the different layers of skin. And Swami realized that at that point, if they knew the anesthesia wore off, they would have to knock him out. They couldn't give him another spinal at that point. And he didn't want to be knocked out, so he just endured it. Now, bear in mind, he had to endure it without changing his breath, without emitting any sound of pain, without flinching. I mean, think of the level of control. He said later when the anesthesiologist came in to see how he was doing, and it wears off, I think it wears off from the bottom up. So it was just shortly after the operation, the anesthesiologist asked him if he can wiggle his toe. Swami flops his whole foot around. Now, the anesthesiologist knew that that meant that it had worn off during the operation. And Swami said he kind of fell against the wall. Swami just didn't say anything at all. Think of the level of control that that would require. And yet, you know, Swamiji felt all levels of reality. He felt sadness when other people were sad. When one of the devotees that he was very close to left Ananda, Swami, by his own words, cried all night. Just was brokenhearted that this devotee was making those choices. And at different times, Swami would just talk to me about, was anything he had done worthwhile? You know, why was these negative things happening to him? Why were these people persecuting him in this way? You know, just very, very natural. But on the other hand, there was this extraordinary spiritual capacity which I experienced continuously from the first day I met him till the very last. It never changed. But I began to understand what it means. You know, it's earth, water, fire, air, ether. It's the whole story. And it all exists simultaneously. It's a very, very, very different world than we think. We can't just cancel our feelings. We can't just say, well, this is, I shouldn't feel this way, so I don't. I remember when someone said something to me, I'd made some changes in my life, and I'd made those changes because my heart drove me to make those changes. And as a consequence, I was feeling the consequences. And so someone said to me, now don't get attached like that. I was very blunt spoken. I've learned to be a tiny bit less. I just said, that is the stupidest thing to say to me. First of all, it's like, you think I don't know that principle? But do you think I would have done all the things I've done if my heart weren't compelled to do it? I can't just cancel out these feelings with a bit of philosophy. It's a very, very serious mistake. We have to, how do I describe what we actually do? You have to live with God in everything that you do. Because this plane of consciousness is just what it is. Toward the end, when it wasn't toward the end of Swami's life, it was much earlier actually. And I was quite unhappy about the state of the planet and the fact that I had to live on it. You know, it's like, what are we doing here? I remember Devarshi said to me, there was a movie theater, and it might have been the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was a movie with a name like that. If it wasn't actually that name, I mean, I know there is a movie with that name, but I don't ever remember being even close to a theater that was playing it. But it was a movie title like that, and we were looking at the movie title, and he said to me, imagine there being a planet where they would make a movie like that, and we're living on it. You know, it was like, how did we end up here? Well, I know how we ended up here. We ended up here because Swami came, and we're his team. And you know, he took the assignment from Master because Master took it from Babaji, and Swami came and he brought us with him. Now, it's been fun. It's been a lifetime like no other. I love it. Every part of it I'm grateful for, but wow, was this really necessary? So I said to Swamiji at one point, I said, sir, the next time we come, can we wait for a higher yuga? This is just early Dwapara, and early Dwapara is really, really tiresome. Imagine a planet where they make movies like that and we're living on it. It's like, can we wait for a higher yuga? Swami gave me two answers. His first answer, which he later rescinded, was, I never intend to come back. That was what he said. But later in his life, not later that day, because it was one of those days for him too. Later in his life, he said, I know myself. I know that I'll come back because I'll want to help all of you. In that conversation, I said, well, that's the only reason you came this time too, isn't it? And Swami said, well, yes, there is that, just like that. But at this time, first he said he was never coming back. And then he said, oh, even in the highest yoga, he said, it's still the material plane. You know, it's just still this world of duality. It's still this world where we have such wonderful aspirations, but you just can't realize them the way that you want to. But he did say, he said, in the higher yugas, people like us are in charge. Can you imagine? Wouldn't that be wonderful? If what I call the nation of self-realization were actually running the planet. I proposed once that we should all have we should all have our own passports. I was in a room with like people from 5 different nations. I said, you know, we should not have all these Poland and, you know, Austria and Italy and India and Russia and the US. You know, we should not have these passports. These are not our countries. We are the nation of self-realization. But I realized by the time anybody would give us those passports, we probably wouldn't have passports at all. We just wouldn't need them. But imagine if we were in charge. But imagine a world that had the karma to put the nation of self-realization in charge. And it happens, but then Swami said, still the material plane. And you know, it's not, even a perfect world is still not the fulfillment that our souls know is the only thing that will satisfy us. So we come back and we try again and we try again and we try again. We go down earth, water, fire, air, ether. We just run the whole thing. Mon, buddhi, ahankara. We just run the whole thing until that feeling just finds its rest in God realization. Because unknown, I walk by your side, guide and guard you with invisible arms. Why are we not constantly aware of that? I mean, that's why I took that and I put it up on my wall by my bed. So soon after I wake up, you know, I look over. You know? Even if I can't see it, why do I not always know that? And of course, that's my sadhana. My sadhana is very simple. Why do I worry about anything? Why don't I always know that? If I can't see those arms because they're invisible, I at least want to feel them. There's a wonderful story that Ananta tells about just some huge project that he was working on, helping to the center that he was running in Sacramento and working with the city and getting the permits and all these sorts of things like that. And just a certain point in this long saga trying to work it out, he said he was standing and he felt Master's arm around him. Ananta's a big man. Master wasn't as tall as he was, but he felt Master's arm around him like this and just said, don't worry, I've got this. You know? That's how we have to live. Don't worry, I've got this. Whatever it asks of us. He's not promising that it'll be easy. But he said, don't worry, I've got this. That's what we're looking for in our lives. God bless you, my friends.